You can just go ahead and skip a quart of Frost and Starlight. I'll get into why you shouldn't in just a minute. But first, welcome to Plot Twists and Hat Tricks. I'm Amanda. Hockey analysis, book obsession. You miss 100% of the pages you don't read. This is the 4th episode, so if you're here, thank you. Hopefully you already listened to the first 3 episodes, but if you missed them, go back and listen for insight on why the ACOTAR series is great for lovers of playoff hockey and my analysis on recent events around the NHL. Here at Plot Twists and Hat Tricks, the episodes are broken down into 3 segments or periods. The first period is always hockey analysis. Could be about the NHL, could be the PWHL, or Professional Women's Hockey League. You will have to tune in to find out. The second period is where I talk about a book. There are never any spoilers for the book being talked about. Ever. Finally, we have the third period, which, similar to the game of hockey, anything can happen. So I consider it my wild card. It changes every week. Well, let's lace up those skates and take the ice. The first period is about to start. Alright, so similar to last week, I am waiting until the last minute to record. So I am currently recording this the night before the episode is set to release. I was waiting to see if there were any notable moves between this week and last week's free agency frenzy. Okay, I was really just waiting to see if Connor Hellebuyck moved, which he didn't. So can we blame the Winnipeg Jets? Okay, never mind. This is a baby podcast still. We can't go calling out NHL teams yet. With that being said, let's talk about what did happen over the past week. Let's start with Jason Robertson. He's going to arbitration. What does that mean? Well, this is something that is specific for RFAs or restricted free agents. And basically, it's a special meeting between the player and the team that they are currently signed with to discuss the contract. Usually, if this meeting happens, then the contract is no longer than 2 years. And this is according to online sources such as Puckopedia. Typically, these meetings do not occur, but if they do, they can be a long process. Another player of note that is going to arbitration is Trevor Zegras of the Philadelphia Flyers. I missed him last week in the craziness of free agency frenzy. One of the things I love about free agency frenzy is that once all the dust settles, then you can really peel back the layers and see some things you missed. But speaking of the arbitration process being a very long process, let's talk about William Nylander's contract from 2018. So this is of note because Nylander demanded that he get paid more than what Toronto thought at the time he was worth. And he went through drastic measures to prove this, including sitting out for the first third of the season. His first game back was, if I'm recalling correctly, like mid-December of the 2018-2019 season, which I just hadn't seen before. According to some research I had done at the time, there had been players that held out that long, and trust me, Nylander definitely got paid what he thinks he deserves. But I just found it interesting that we have a player that is willing to sit out, actively is losing money because he does not think that his contract is worth how hard he is working or the player that he is. So do I see that happening again with Jason Robertson or even Trevor Zegras? No. I can't imagine that both the Philadelphia Flyers and or the Dallas Stars are going to want to get these meetings handled or get these contracts handled before the meetings start. So we will see what happens, but I'll definitely be keeping an eye on those 2 players. Okay, I need to talk about Connor Hellebuyck. As a reminder, he is not a free agent this year, but recently Stuart Skinner formerly on the Pittsburgh Penguins, signed with the Winnipeg Jets. So rumors are swirling about where where he's gonna sign. Is he gonna stay with Winnipeg? Is he going to end up going to another team? Carolina is still in the talks, especially since Frederik Andersen recently signed with the Edmonton Oilers. When I was doing a little bit of research today, I saw that Colorado is in the trade talks. Personally, I don't think this is a good move. I think the Colorado goaltending is solid right now. With Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood, I think that goalie tandem is one of the strongest in the league, and it would not be a good move on Colorado's part to invest in that. I could see him going to Carolina and succeeding in Carolina, especially since they are going to be leaning on maybe not as experienced goalies. So it will be interesting to see where Hellebuyck lands. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on that. Some more big news is Alexander Ovechkin resigned for a 1-year contract. Could this be his farewell tour? I'm thinking yes. It would fit Ovechkin's personality and his player status to want to do a farewell tour. I think it will sell tickets. I think that it will sell merch. I think that him wanting to advertise that this is his last season is something he would do. But keep in mind that there are rumors that he might just continuously be doing 1-year extensions until he just decides he wants to be done playing. If he decides to do that, this becomes less about the team and more about the player. So if he continuously signs just 1-year extensions year after year after year, the team can't plan for his absence because they're like, oh, well, he might just resign again next year. And especially if he does this for like 2-3 years, team's going to be like, oh, he's just going to come back next year. He's just going to resign again. So if he suddenly doesn't, then it's going to be a shock to the team. Whereas I think with him signing this 1-year extension is, in a way, him saying, without actually saying, that this is going to be his last season in the NHL. I'll be watching for news, but those are just my thoughts as of right now. Jacob Trouba signed with San Jose. So why is this significant? Well, he jumped from the Anaheim Ducks to San Jose. Trouba is a veteran player. I remember him playing, I want to say it was with the Rangers, but I could just be mixing players up in my head right now. And I think he's going to add just some veteran presence to the Sharks. And the Sharks have been rebuilding for the past several seasons. So I would not count the Sharks out anytime in the near future. I think this signing is showing that the Sharks mean business and that they are going to be a playoff contender this year. I'm willing to bet on it. So our next player, who is technically a restricted free agent, who could be going to arbitration, but I have not seen news of him resigning, but I expect that he's going to stay with the Blackhawks after he announced earlier today that he is going to be missing the first several months of the season with having a shoulder surgery. This was confirmed through some NHL articles as well as Emily Kaplan confirming this. So I have a little bit of a hot take about Connor Bedard. And I remember him joining the league several years ago. And just hearing the advertising of him was making him sound like, oh, he's going to be the next Connor McDavid, the next Sidney Crosby. He's God's gift to hockey. But I'm sorry, what has he done to deserve those comparisons? We were comparing him to these players before he even stepped onto the NHL's ice. Yes, he was impressive in juniors, but just because you're good in juniors does not mean that you make it in the big league. And just because you aren't good in juniors doesn't mean you don't make it in the big league. So, especially with young players, I'm very tentative when you see, like, oh, he's going to be the next big thing. And I did fall for it. When I was young, I fell for, oh, McKinnon is going to be the next big thing in the NHL. And luckily, McKinnon was. He took some time, but that's kind of what happens with the first overall pick. Personally, I have not seen Bedard change my mind in any way to show me that he should be in the conversation with those players. I do think he is a bit overrated, but I'm willing to have him prove me wrong. I would love for him to prove me wrong, actually. I think the Blackhawks have been in a rebuild since Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews left the organization. So I think the Blackhawks and their fans definitely deserve to have a solid team. And I think they're trying. But I don't know if Connor Bedard is that answer. But I guess we'll see. Maybe the shoulder surgery and the rehab he has after the surgery will help him out. But I guess we're going to just have to wait and see. All right, so let's talk about Patrick Kane. So I saw on the NHL's Instagram page today where they listed the notable free agents that are still available. And Patrick Kane was on this list. And that got me thinking, is he going to retire? He came into the league around the same time as Jonathan Toews, which notably did retire after this past season. So could Patrick Kane be following in his footsteps? Could he be looking to see what Larkin does and leave along with Larkin? Or if Dylan Larkin does leave, does that mean he stays? Or does he go if Larkin stays? There are rumors lighting up with a quick Google search of if he's going to retire, if he's going to move, where he's going to go. I'm going to be honest with this one. I'm not sure. I could see him playing another season, maybe 2 seasons, but if he announced his retirement tomorrow, I also wouldn't be shocked. I think he's had a great career. I think that it would be okay for him to step aside and to retire and maybe go into a front office position or go into coaching or maybe even just take a break. But that's totally his call. But I could see him retiring, and we're just going to stick with that. Speaking of Dylan Larkin, it has been quiet on that end. I haven't really heard any news, but I've heard some rumblings with the Red Wings that they don't want to let him go, and that Steve Yzerman is being stubborn and not wanting to just trade him and get nothing, or just trade him because he requested the trade. So are they trying to find the perfect deal for him? Are they entertaining his trade request? Are they just being like, oh, well, too bad you're stuck in a contract with us, so you gotta play for us? With all of this drama happens, it leaves me to question, will we see him with the C or the captaincy next season, even with his expressing of wanting to leave? If I'm in that position, if I'm in the coaching position or the GM position, I rip that C off his chest. He asked for a trade. He doesn't want to be there. I don't want somebody who doesn't want to be there leading my team, because if there's any negative energy, then that pulls him down. And I think that's just bad. Team morale, I think that generally speaking, it's going to be a tense locker room if he starts the season off with the Red Wings, with or without that captain spot. It'll be interesting to see what the Red Wings decide to do, if they do anything with him during the off season, or if we tune in October and see that Dylan Larkin is still with the Red Wings. I guess time will tell what will happen. And so the last player I want to cover is Claude Giroux, who re-signed 1 year with Ottawa, which is fantastic for the Senators. They needed that veteran player, especially after losing Brady Tkachuk. I could see Claude Giroux going back to the Flyers. I could see him wanting to retire as a Flyer. But honestly, I could see this as being his last season too. He's getting to an age where he could be looking at retirement, and I think he would. I think he'll go out with a bang. I think he'll be able to spread some wisdom with the younger players on Ottawa and kind of fill that gap that Brady left when he moved down to Florida. So I think it's a great move for Ottawa to resign him, even if it is just for 1 year. But I do expect that he'll be retiring, if not this season, next season. All right, similar to last week, period 1 was a stacked and just full of chaos. I guess if I can't watch hockey every night, this is the second best option. I'm loving all the content coming out around the NHL and excited to start digging for the PWHL, or the Professional Women's Hockey League news. That has been a little bit harder to find, and it could just be shifting my algorithm around a little bit. But let's shift gears and dive into a different sort of chaos in a short segment about the 4th book of the ACOTAR series, A Court of Frost and Starlight. Alright, so let's start with what this book is even about. Essentially, this is a bridge book between the events of A Court of Wings and Ruin and A Court of Silver Flames. It's commonly seen in the fandom as the Christmas special. At least that's how it was described to me when I read it the first time, due to it occurring over the winter solstice. This book also changes POVs every chapter. How I've consumed it. I typically eyeball read this book. I do not recall if I even have it on audio now that I'm thinking about it. So I can honestly say that even on rereads, I typically skip over this book. It is not my favorite in the series. So why should you read it? Well, there's not too much romance and there's not too much violence, but you have the opportunity to build a relationship with the characters and have the ability to see the world through their eyes. And I think that is the most valuable thing about this book, and why I would not skip A Court of Frost and Starlight, especially if you're reading the series for the first time. Maybe on a reread after you've read the series once, maybe twice, then yeah, skip it on a reread. There's not too much going on, but it does wrap up some loose ends from A Court of Wings and Ruin, and it sets up the plot for A Court of Silver Flames so well. I think SJM did a great job with the changing of point of views so that it continued to have the story move forward instead of it just pause. So let's talk about my thoughts. As I mentioned, this is my least favorite book in the series. And even though it is the shortest, at least right now, since we don't know exactly how long ACOTAR 6 is going to be, I've heard rumors that it is slightly longer than A Court of Frost and Starlight, but until I see the book and can compare it in my hands, I don't believe it. It also took me the longest to get through. Like, I remember reading the ACOTAR series for the first time, and I blew through ACOTAR, A Court of Mist and Fury, and A Court of Wings and Ruin in probably maybe 3 weeks total. And it took me a good 2 weeks, I would say, to read a quarter of Frost and Starlight. And it wasn't because it was long, as I mentioned. I couldn't get into it. I wasn't in a place in my reading journey to be able to not have something constantly happening, for it to be kind of like sitting and watching a rom-com, or like I mentioned earlier, having it be a Christmas special. I was also tentative because I knew that it changed point of views every chapter. And personally for me, I struggle with that. I think that changing a point of views scares me, because the first point of view shifting book that I read was the Game of Thrones series. And if you've read the Game of Thrones series, then you know that each chapter is from a different character's point of view, and each character essentially is on their own journey. And when that chapter ends, essentially their story pauses and you go on to a new story. And then you might not see that character's story for 4 or 5 chapters. And then you're suddenly back and you're supposed to remember what's going on. And where some people love that, I personally don't. I have gotten more accustomed to changes in point of view, but it has to be done in what I consider a story progression way. So when the story is continuous, like we're using the change in point of view to progress the story along, then I see this more as an enhancement. And I don't feel like stuck in ice, so to speak, between chapters. I think there are a lot of books that do demonstrate the change of point of view brilliantly. I know A Court of Silver Flames does it very, very well. I think that Assistant to the Villain, I think, does that very well. I believe the Game Changer series as well did it pretty well. A lot of the rom-coms or smaller standalone books that I've read definitely changed my perspective on it. So if a book is intimidating to you because it changes point of view, I would say give it a shot. If it is really intimidating to you, which I can totally understand because I've been there, I would start maybe with a standalone instead, because if you can get the flow with a standalone, then going into a series isn't as complicated. So looking back on A Court of Frost and Starlight, like I said, when I first read this book, I think I was intimidated, and definitely not because of size, like I mentioned, but because of the changing of point of views. And the only other experience I'd had up to that moment of changing point of views was maybe an extra chapter here and there from a different character's point of view in the Empyrean series and Fourth Wing, or then Game of Thrones. And I think the experience with Game of Thrones really changed how I viewed it, so that made it a little scary for me, and I think is a significant reason to why I didn't like it on the first read through. On future rereads, I do appreciate it. I would also recommend, if you are struggling to get through this book and you don't mind spoilers for the series, then I would check out the Fantasy Fangirls podcast. They did a deep dive on the entire ACOTAR series, and they did 2 episodes on A Court of Frost and Starlight, and they make that book a lot more meaningful, especially knowing that it is not a favorite book through the fandom. So I think that they did a beautiful job on analyzing that book and pulling out some Easter eggs. But all in all, please do not skip this book if you're just reading the series through. Just push through it any way you can. Even if it means it takes you 2 weeks to read the book, do it. Just read one chapter a night and just push through the book, because you need the information in that book to have a better grasp of what is going to go on in A Court of Silver Flames. So I think the description of it being a bridge book is perfect for it. You can't really skip it because you need the information, and there are some references to what happened in the events of that book in A Court of Silver Flames. You could skip it and still be successful in A Court of Silver Flames, but I would highly, highly recommend not skipping it, even though, as I said, throughout the fandom, it is not a favorite. Okay, so that was about as confusing as I was expecting, and I rambled about as much as I expected to. I want to apologize about it, but I just don't think I can. As I mentioned, A Court of Frost and Starlight is kind of a bridge book. I've mentioned that several times now, between the events of ACOWAR and sets up the events of A Court of Silver Flames, and it does just that. But with avoiding spoilers, it's just going to remain confusing, and you're just going to hear me preach of, like, hey, it changes point of view. You see the world through different eyes. You build a connection with the different characters. And if you haven't read it, then it's going to continue to remain confusing. So with that being said, let's have some fun in the third period, where I sort some of the main characters from the ACOTAR series onto teams in either the NHL or the PWHL. So this was inspired a little bit with the changing of point of views for A Court of Frost and Starlight. I remember when I was doing planning for this podcast, I planned out the first 5 episodes before I even started writing outlines, before I found the podcasting recording platform, before I even came up with a name for the podcast. I was plotting out the first 5 episodes, and I knew I wanted to cover the ACOTAR series first. And I was like, what could I do for the third period that is kind of fun, that also kind of goes with the theme? If you've noticed thus far, I do try to match the third period with something that happened in the previous 2 periods. So this one felt right. Last week, we sorted some NHL players into the courts of Pythian. So this week I thought we would sort some of our favorite Pythian characters into NHL or PWHL teams. Now keep in mind, I do have reasons for why these characters are there, and this is meant to be fun. This is not a diss on a team. I'm looking at, hey, this is how the team is viewed. This is how this character is viewed. I'm sorry if your favorite player is matched with your favorite team rather, is matched with your least favorite character. That is not done on purpose. Like I said, this is just for fun. So let's have fun with it. Let's start with Farah. I put her in Boston, the PWHL Boston Fleet. So I thought very hard of where to put Farah. There are not a lot of PWHL teams right now. I believe there are 9 teams right now. So the pickings are slim compared to the NHL that has 32 teams. And Farah was actually one of the last players that I sorted. And I was between putting her in Boston with the Boston Fleet or putting her in Minnesota with the Minnesota Frost. And I ended up in Boston purely because of where I put Rysand, but also the reason why I was toying between the Boston Fleet and Minnesota Frost is those are two very recognizable PWHL teams. They have very notable players, and considering Farah's main character energy, it felt like she would go to one of those teams. And with Boston being as big of a sports city as they are, it felt like she would fit really well with the Boston Fleet. So that's why I ended up putting her there. All right, so Rysand. I put him with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I have my reasonings for putting him there. I think that he, as a leader, he reminds me a lot of Sidney Crosby in a way, not directly, but in the way that he is a player that his team would need. So if you're familiar with Sidney Crosby's play, he can be that goal scorer, but he can also be that guy who gives you the perfect pass to score the goal. He knows when to pass, he knows when to shoot. And I think when I was reflecting on this, Pittsburgh just felt right for Rysand. They have a lot of history. They are not an Original Six team, but I think that the history that the Penguins have and the loyalty that the fandom has, as well as the players, just sets them apart, and I really think that Rysand would fit really well in Pittsburgh. Now for my controversial character. I really should just stop bringing this character to things. So we're going to talk about Tamlin for a little bit. Timmy Tam, Tampon. I'm trying to think of other... Those are the only names I can think of off the top of my head that the fandom calls him. Anyway, so I put him with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And before all those Maple Leafs fans come at me, I have my reasoning for it. So Tamlin steps up when he needs to, which I believe Toronto does during the regular season. They are, except for this past season, typically able to make the playoffs. They are able to perform very well during the regular season, but then they choke when it really matters, and that's usually in playoffs. And Tamlin kind of strikes me as that person. I think that he kind of embodies Toronto. And that's not a diss on Toronto. That's not a diss on Tamlin. Okay, maybe it is a little diss on Tamlin and a little diss on Toronto. But maybe Toronto picks it up this year and then Tamlin goes to a different team. We will check back in next season to see if Tamlin moves from Toronto to a different team. Anyway, we are going to move on about. So let's talk about more. So when I was originally doing this, I originally just did NHL teams. And then I was like, hey, I have some women on my character list. Why not use the PWHL teams? And what do you know? The PWHL announced this year that they are bringing a team to Las Vegas. So I thought that would be perfect for Moore. I think she would like the showmanship. I think she would really love the Las Vegas Strip. I think that she would thrive in that environment. Originally, when I had her listed with an NHL team, I did have her with Vegas, so it did work out quite nicely that the PWHL also has a team going to Vegas. So I think she would fit really well on whatever they end up naming that team. But right now, it's PWHL Las Vegas. Our next character is Amron. and I chose her for the New York Sirens. So this one is specifically the location. So as I think it is mentioned in A Court of Frost and Starlight. It could also be briefly mentioned in A Court of Mist and Fury or A Court of Wings and Ruin. I don't remember exactly when it came out, but Amren is a huge sports fan. And when I think of New York, I'm thinking the New York Knicks, I'm thinking the New York Rangers, I'm thinking New York Islanders, I'm thinking the Mets, the Yankees. There is a lot going on in New York, and I think that Amren playing for the New York Sirens would kind of be perfect for that. Could I have put her on a team like Boston, a big sports city where they have the Patriots and stuff? Absolutely. But she just, when I was looking at the list of PWHL teams, that one just screamed Amren to me, and I was like, I gotta put her there. And that's how she ended up on the New York Sirens. All right, so one of our bat boys, Azriel, I put him on the Detroit Red Wings. And my reason being is that is in Original 16. He shows loyalty, as does that fan base. And I think that he would do whatever it takes to make that team a playoff contender again. And that he would just give it his all through any team rebuilds. And I think that if we go by age and say that he was drafted when he was of age at 18 and he just spent 400 plus years, I think he'd be one of those players that stayed with the team and did not move from team to team and just never retired and just stayed with Detroit. So he just vibes with me as a Red Wing. So that's why I put him in Detroit. All right. Our next character is Elaine. So I put her in the PWHL San Jose. So again, originally I was just doing this with NHL teams. And I put her with the Ducks, the Anaheim Ducks. And so when I was looking at the PWHL teams, I was like, okay, let's move her to San Jose. And why was I thinking of putting her in California? Well, there's a couple different reasons. So my main reason of why I wanted to put her with the Ducks is she kind of reminds me a little bit of a Disney princess to an extent. So I was like, oh, Anaheim, right next to Disney. That would be great. She'd probably have like one of those annual passes and on her days off, go to Disney World or Land, whichever one is in California. And so when I was looking, I was like, oh, Anaheim does not have a PWHL team. I was like, well, San Jose. She would probably go to Disney during like all-star breaks. And San Jose just also, it felt right there. I mean, with the San Jose Sharks, I'm sure that she would find a way to pair with the NHL team and find a way to do like some conservation with sharks and use that as a publicity thing. And so I could just see her doing that and really wanting to partner with an NHL team. So when I was also looking at that list, I was like, well, almost all of these teams, except for at least one that I'm looking at or I'm thinking of off memory, has an NHL team host. So I was like, I can't eliminate that way. So PWHL San Jose just felt right for Elaine. And PWHL gets another person in Nesta. So again, when I originally drafted this, I was just doing NHL teams. And I originally had Nesta with the Florida Panthers. And that was because of the style of play that the Panthers have. They kind of have this, like, I would say enforcer energy, and I feel like Nesta would be like all for that and would have done well. But then when I put Elaine in Anaheim at the time before I switched to the PWHL, I was like, there's no way Nesta would be on a team on the other side of the country from Elaine, because if you've read the books, you know how fiercely protective of Elaine Nesta is. So she could be on the other side of the country from Farah, but not Elaine. So I was like, well, why don't we just put her on the same team as Elaine? And that's how Nesta ended up on the PWHL San Jose. All right, 2 more characters. Our second to last character is Cassian. So I put him in Philly, and a couple reasons. First reason is because that would mean that his essentially mortal enemy would be Rysand playing on Pittsburgh. And I was like, I gobbled that up. I was giggling to myself when I did that. And I was like, yeah, he would want to go on the rival team to Rysand just to give him a bad time. And plus, Philly also has this reputation of being... They had a team back, or a name back in the 70s called the Broad Street Bullies, and that kind of stuck with me a bit. And I was like, Cassian could definitely fit into that, and I think he would fit into that style of play that they had at the time, and I think he would just continuously push for that style of play, even in today's modern age of hockey. And then finally, we have Lucien. I struggled with finding a place to put Lucien, to be honest. So I kind of tracked him from his journey of through the ACOTAR series. So we first meet Lucien in the spring court with Tamlin. So if we're following that logic, then Lucien might have played in Toronto, which Toronto, very, very cold. And his mate is Elaine, who plays in the San Jose PWHL team. But as of this recording and as of the books being released, she doesn't really want anything to do with him. So he wouldn't want to be close to her, like Farah is close to Rysand with Boston and Pittsburgh. So I was like, okay, we're not going to put him in the West Coast. Let's put him in the East Coast, and let's put him the opposite of Toronto. So I landed on Tampa Bay, and reasoning for that is I think he'd be a very loyal player to whatever team he plays on. I think that with him playing on Tampa, that would just be fun because of the difference in team dynamics from the Toronto Maple Leafs to the Tampa Bay Lightning. So it just felt right to put him in Tampa, and that's really all I have for that. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to the 4th episode of Plot Twist and Hat Tricks. Since we are a brand new rookie podcast, please rate 5 stars and leave a nice review, as it helps other hockey lovers and book enthusiasts find me. I am active on social media. Find me on TikTok and Instagram at PTHTpod, or email me at pthtpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas for future episodes. Until then, remember, you miss 100% of the pages you never read and the shots you never take. If you haven't already, go ahead and listen to the first 3 episodes of this podcast, and I'll be back next week to dive into the PWHL, A Court of Silver Flames, and the importance of women in sports.